The evening rush at Rosie's diner had finally started to slow down. Claire wiped down table 7 for what felt like the 100th time that day, her feet aching in her old sneakers. The lunch shift had bled into dinner without so much as a 5-minute break, and now at 8:30, she could feel every single hour pressing down on her shoulders. She glanced at the new grand piano sitting in the corner of the restaurant. It had arrived 2 weeks ago, a beautiful black Steinway that the owner had bought at an auction. He thought it would class up the place, make Rosie's feel more upscale, but it just sat there, silent and gathering dust like an expensive piece of furniture that nobody quite knew what to do with. Claire had noticed it the moment it arrived. How could she not? But she'd kept her distance, only allowing herself quick glances when she thought no one was watching. Some doors once closed were better left that way. Table 12 needs water, her manager called from behind the counter, pulling her back to reality. Right, water. That's what she did now. She refilled water glasses and took orders and smiled at customers even when they didn't smile back. It was honest work and it paid the bills. Most of them anyway. Table 12 was the corner booth, the best spot in the restaurant. 4 men in expensive suits had claimed it 2 hours ago, and they showed no signs of leaving. Their jackets probably cost more than Claire made in 3 months. She recognized the type immediately. Big deals, bigger egos, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to check a price tag. The loudest one sat facing the room. Richard something, she'd heard his friends call him. He had that look about him, the kind of man who was used to being the most important person in any room he walked into. Salt and pepper hair, a Rolex that caught the light every time he moved his wrist, and a laugh that carried across the entire restaurant. Claire approached with the water pitcher, trying to be invisible the way good servers learned to be. Fill the glasses, don't interrupt the conversation. Disappear before they even notice you were there. This place is trying too hard, Richard was saying, gesturing broadly with his wine glass. You see that ridiculous piano over there? Takes up half the corner. Probably cost a fortune, and for what? Decoration? What a waste of space, his friends chuckled in agreement. One of them, a younger guy with slicked back hair, added, maybe they think it makes them look sophisticated, like putting a chandelier in a fast food joint. They all laughed at that. Claire felt her grip tighten on the water pitcher. She should have kept quiet. She knew she should have. But the words came out before she could stop them. Actually, live music can really transform the atmosphere of a restaurant, she said softly, immediately regretting opening her mouth. Studies show that guests tend to stay longer and order more when there's good music playing. 4 pairs of eyes turned to look at her. The conversation died. Richard leaned back in his seat, a slow smile spreading across his face. Not a kind smile. The kind of smile a cat gives a mouse, is that so? He said, his tone dripping with amusement. And where exactly did you study restaurant management? Let me guess, the University of YouTube? His friends laughed right on cue. Claire felt heat rising to her cheeks. I just meant that, sweetheart. Richard interrupted, still smiling that terrible smile. I've owned 17 restaurants across 5 cities. I think I know a little more about the business than someone who... He gestured vaguely at her uniform, her notepad, her existence. Serves water for a living. The younger guy snorted into his drink. Another one, bald with frameless glasses, was trying not to laugh. Of course I'm sorry, Claire managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll just... No, wait, Richard said, holding up his hand like he was about to bestow some great wisdom. I'm genuinely curious now. You seem to have opinions about that piano. Do you play, is that it? Are you a secret concert pianist working here undercover? His friends were loving this. Entertainment with their dessert? Claire wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She could feel other diners starting to watch now, sensing drama. The family at table 6 had stopped eating. Even the couple by the window had turned around. I used to, she said quietly, immediately wishing she'd lied. Wishing she'd said, no, I don't know anything about pianos, I'm sorry for bothering you. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Used to? Well. And what happened? Let me guess, it didn't work out? Turns out you weren't as talented as you thought? The words hit exactly where he meant them to. Claire felt something crack inside her chest. The kind of pain that came from someone poking at an old wound that had never quite healed. Something like that. She whispered. She turned to leave, desperate to escape to the kitchen where she could hide her burning face and the tears threatening to spill over. But Richard wasn't done yet. "Hold on, sweetheart. Don't run off." She stopped because when a customer tells you to stop, you stop. That was the job. "You know what I think?" Richard said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "I think that piano is just like you said. Wasted potential, expensive decoration gathering dust. Kinda sad, really." His friends were grinning now, sensing their companion was building up to something. Claire stood frozen, the water pitcher trembling slightly in her hands. Her manager was watching from across the room, his face concerned but not concerned enough to intervene. Not when the table had already spent $300 and ordered a second bottle of wine. "I apologize if I overstepped," Claire said, forcing the words out. "I'll let you gentlemen finish your evening." No, I'm serious now," Richard said, and something in his tone had shifted. He was enjoying himself too much. This had become sport. "You got me thinking about that piano." About wasted opportunities. About people who talk big but can't back it up. The restaurant had gone quiet now. Everyone was watching. Even the kitchen staff had paused, sensing something unfolding. Claire stood there, exhausted and humiliated, just wanting this night to end. Wanting to go home to her small apartment, kick off these awful shoes, and forget this conversation ever happened. But Richard wasn't finished. Not even close. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the kind of cruel amusement that came from someone who'd never been on the receiving end of this kind of attention. "So here's what I'm thinking," he said slowly, deliberately knowing he had an audience now. "Since you seem to know so much about pianos and music and atmosphere, maybe you should prove it." Claire's stomach dropped, and that was when he made the bet. Richard pulled out his leather wallet, the kind that probably cost more than Claire's monthly rent. He made a show of it, opening it slowly, letting everyone see the thick stack of bills inside. The restaurant was dead silent now. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. "Here's what we're going to do," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Since you clearly know so much about pianos and music, I'm going to give you a chance to prove it." Claire's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to walk away. She should walk away, but her feet wouldn't move. Richard pulled out a stack of bills and laid them on the table. $100 bills. 10 of them. $1,000 just sitting there on the white tablecloth next to his half-eaten cheesecake. $1,000, he said, tapping the money with his finger. "If you can sit down at that piano and play something actually impressive, something that proves you're not just some waitress with delusions of grandeur, this money is yours." One of his friends whistled low. The younger guy was grinning like this was the best entertainment he'd had all month. Claire stared at the money. $1,000. That was 2 months of her mother's medication. That was the overdue electric bill and the car payment she'd been dodging. That was breathing room she hadn't had in 3 years. "But," Richard continued, holding up one finger, "if you can't play, or if you refuse this generous offer, then you have to do something for me." Here it comes, Claire thought, the other shoe dropping. "You have to announce to everyone here loud and clear that you are talking out of turn, that people like you don't belong in fine establishments giving advice to people like me, that you should stick to what you know, which is bringing people their food and keeping your opinions to yourself." The cruelty of it took Claire's breath away. It wasn't even about the piano anymore. This was about putting her in her place, about reminding her of the invisible line between servers and served, between people who matter and people who don't. "That's messed up, man," someone muttered from a nearby table. Claire couldn't see who, but Richard ignored it. "So what do you say, sweetheart? Want to put your money where your mouth is? Or are you going to admit you were out of line?" Claire's manager, Tom, finally found his voice. "Richard, that's really not necessary." Claire was just trying to be helpful. "Stay out of this, Tom," Richard said without even looking at him. "This is between me and your employee here. Unless you want me to take my business elsewhere? I'm sure your competitors would love to have my group's monthly meetings." Tom's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Claire with something like pity, then looked away. She was on her own. Claire's hands were shaking so badly she had to set down the water pitcher on an empty table. $1,000. Her mother's face flashed through her mind. The pills bottles lined up on the bathroom counter, each one representing a choice between health and bankruptcy. The notice on the door about late rent. The car that needed new brakes she couldn't afford. But the other part of the bet, the humiliation of it, standing in front of all these people and saying she didn't belong, saying she should know her place. "I need a minute," she managed to say. "Take your time," Richard said generously, like he was doing her a favor. "We're not going anywhere." Claire turned and walked quickly toward the kitchen, her vision blurring. She pushed through the swinging door and leaned against the prep counter, trying to breathe. Hey, you okay?" Her co-worker Miguel appeared at her elbow. He'd been watching the whole thing through the order window. "I don't know what to do," Claire whispered. "I need that money so badly, Miguel. You don't even know how badly I need it." "Then take the bet," Miguel said. "Play the piano. Show that jerk what you're made of." Claire laughed, but it came out choked. "I haven't played in 3 years. 3 years. My fingers probably don't even remember how. But you used to play, right? Like really play?" "Yeah," Claire said quietly. "I really played." She'd more than played. She'd lived and breathed music. Juilliard wasn't just a school. It was everything she'd worked toward since she was 6 years old. Every recital, every competition, every hour of practice when other kids were out having fun. Her parents had sacrificed everything to pay for lessons, to buy her a decent piano, to drive her to auditions across 3 states, and she'd made it. Full scholarship to one of the best music schools in the world. Her piano professor said she had a gift, that she could be one of the greats if she worked hard enough. But then her father's heart attack came out of nowhere. 52 years old and gone in a hospital hallway while Claire was in the middle of her sophomore recital. She'd felt it somehow, missed a note she'd never missed before. Later she'd wonder if that was the moment, if some part of her had known. 3 months after the funeral, her mother's hands started shaking. Little tremors at first, then bigger ones. The diagnosis came quick. Early onset Parkinson's, aggressive, expensive. The kind that eats through savings and insurance and hope. Someone had to take care of her. Someone had to work. Someone had to keep the lights on and put food on the table, and make sure the medication didn't run out. Claire had 2 more years until graduation. 2 more years until she could have made something of herself. Could have had a career that might have paid enough to cover everything. But her mother couldn't wait 2 years. The disease wouldn't wait, so she'd left. Packed up her dorm room, said goodbye to her dreams, and came home. She'd sold her piano to pay for 3 months of medication. It had felt like cutting off a limb. "Claire?" Miguel's voice brought her back. "What are you going to do?" She looked at her hands. They were rough now, marked by years of carrying hot plates and scrubbing tables. The nails she used to keep perfectly trimmed for playing were chipped and short. There was a burn scar on her left thumb from last week when she'd grabbed a pan wrong. These weren't a pianist's hands anymore, but underneath the scars and the roughness, underneath 3 years of disuse, the training was still there. You don't forget thousands of hours of practice. The muscle memory doesn't just disappear. "I'm going to do it," she heard herself say. Miguel's face broke into a grin. Yeah. Claire straightened up, wiping her eyes. "I'm going to play." She walked back out into the dining room. Richard was still sitting there, looking entirely too pleased with himself. His friends were on their phones now, probably texting other people about the entertainment. The family at table 6 was watching anxiously. The elderly couple by the window had their hands clasped together like they were praying. Several people had their phones out, cameras ready. Claire walked right up to Richard's table. Her heart was racing, but her hands had stopped shaking. "I'll take your bet," she said clearly. Richard's smile widened. "Excellent. Now this is going to be interesting. But I have a condition," Claire added. Richard's smile faltered slightly. "Excuse me? When I play something impressive, and I will, you don't just give me the money. You also apologize. To me and to every service worker you've ever talked down to. Right here in front of everyone." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Richard's face darkened. His friends had stopped grinning. For a moment, Claire thought he might back out, might call the whole thing off. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "Fine," he said. "When you fail, and you will, you make your announcement. And if by some miracle you don't fail, I'll apologize. Deal?" Claire nodded once. "Deal." She turned toward the piano, and every eye in the restaurant followed her. Someone started recording on their phone. Then another person. Then another. Claire's legs felt like jelly as she crossed the restaurant floor. The piano seemed miles away and right in front of her at the same time. When was the last time she'd played? Really played? Her mother's birthday, 3 years and 2 months ago. She'd played her mother's favorite piece, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, on the old upright in their living room. 2 weeks later, she'd sold that piano. Claire sat down on the bench. The leather was cool against her legs. The piano was beautiful up close, perfectly maintained, the keys gleaming in the soft restaurant lighting. She lifted her hands and positioned them over the keys, and then she froze. Claire's hands hovered over the keys, but she couldn't make them move. It was like there was an invisible wall between her fingers and the piano. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she'd played a single note. What was she thinking? She couldn't do this. Not here, not now, not in front of all these people with their phones out and their judgmental eyes. Not in front of that awful man who was probably already composing the speech he'd make her give when she failed. Having second thoughts, Richard called out from his table, his voice dripping with amusement. "Nobody would blame you for backing out. Save yourself the embarrassment," his friends chuckled. The sound made something twist in Claire's stomach. Her hands were shaking again. She pulled them back into her lap, staring down at the keys. 88 keys. She used to know every single one of them like they were old friends. She could play with her eyes closed, could feel the music in her bones before her fingers even touched down. But that was a different person. A different life. "Come on," someone whispered from somewhere in the restaurant. Claire couldn't tell if they were encouraging her or just impatient to see what would happen. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And suddenly she was back there, move-in day at Juilliard. 18 years old, scared and excited and so full of hope it hurt. Her father had carried her suitcase up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. Her mother had cried in the hallway, but they were happy tears. "You're going to do amazing things," her father had said, his hand warm on her shoulder. "We're so proud of you, Butterfly, Butterfly." He'd called her that since she was little, said her fingers danced across the keys like butterfly wings. Claire opened her eyes. The restaurant came back into focus. The staring faces. The phone's recording. Richard leaning back in his chair with that smug expression. She looked down at her hands again. These weren't the hands of that hopeful 18-year-old anymore. They were older, marked by life, by loss, by 3 years of hard work that had nothing to do with music, but her father's voice echoed in her head. Amazing things. What would he think if he could see her now? About to humiliate herself in front of a room full of strangers? Or would he be proud that she was even trying? Claire's eyes drifted to the corner of the piano where someone had left their phone recording. In the black screen reflection, she could see herself. Tired, worn out, defeated before she'd even started. When had she become this person? She thought about her mother, alone in their small apartment right now, probably asleep in her recliner with the TV on because the silence was too heavy. Her hands would be tucked under a blanket, hiding the tremors that got worse every year. Her mother, who used to dance around the kitchen while Claire practiced, who'd spent every penny they had on piano lessons, who'd never once complained when Claire had to come home and give it all up. Last week, Claire had found her mother crying in the bathroom. "I stole your dreams," her mother had sobbed. "You should hate me." Claire had held her, feeling how thin she'd gotten, how fragile. "You didn't steal anything," she'd whispered. "I chose to come home. I'd choose it again," and she'd meant it. But that didn't mean she didn't miss it. The music, the feeling of being good at something, of being more than just okay, the feeling of purpose. "This is painful to watch." Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. "Just admit you can't do it and we can all move on with our evening." Something in Claire snapped. She was tired. God, she was so tired. Tired of being talked down to. Tired of being invisible. Tired of working herself to the bone and still coming up short. Tired of being afraid. Her professor at Juilliard used to say that music wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. About taking everything inside you, all the joy and pain and fear and hope, and turning it into something real. The best performances, Professor Chen had told her class, come from the broken places. When you play, don't hide your scars. Let them sing. Claire's hands moved back to the keys. This time, she let them rest there. The ivory was cool and smooth under her fingertips. Familiar even after all this time. She didn't need to prove anything to Richard. She already knew how this would end with him. Men like that never really apologized, never really changed. Win or lose, he'd find a way to make himself the hero of the story. But maybe she needed to prove something to herself, that she was still in there somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the fear. That girl who'd gotten into Juilliard, that girl who used to believe she could be great. Claire's right foot found the sustain pedal. Her posture straightened automatically, years of training kicking in. Shoulders relaxed, Wrists loose, breathe. She was going to play Rachmaninoff. Piano Concerto No. 2. The piece that had gotten her into Juilliard in the first place. The piece she'd performed for her final recital the night her father died. The piece she swore she'd never play again because it hurt too much. But maybe that was exactly why she needed to play it now. The opening notes were soft, almost hesitant. Her fingers found the familiar pattern, and it was like greeting an old friend you'd lost touch with. Awkward at first, uncertain, but then something shifted. Her muscle memory woke up. 3 years melted away. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The notes came easier, more confident. The melody began to build. Claire forgot about Richard. Forgot about the cameras and the watching eyes. Forgot about the bet and the money and the humiliation hanging over her head. There was only the music. It poured out of her like water from a broken dam. 3 years of grief, of frustration, of biting her tongue and making herself small, of watching her dreams slip away while she did the right thing, the hard thing, the necessary thing. The melody soared, and Claire went with it. Her hands flew across the keys, moving through passages she'd practiced 10,000 times in another lifetime. The technical parts that used to give her trouble felt effortless now. Maybe it was because she had nothing left to lose. Maybe it was because she'd forgotten how to be afraid of the music. The restaurant had disappeared. In her mind, she was back in the concert hall at Juilliard. The stage lights warm on her face. Her parents in the third row. Her mother already crying before she'd played a note. Her father beaming with pride she was playing for him now. For the man who'd believed in her when she was 6 years old and banging randomly on a toy keyboard. Who'd worked overtime to pay for her first real piano. Who'd driven her to competitions on weekends. Who'd listened to her practice the same piece 100 times and never once complained. The music swelled. Big, sweeping phrases that Rachmaninoff was famous for. The kind of music that made you feel like you were flying and falling at the same time. Claire's eyes were closed now, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't stop playing. Her fingers knew the way. They'd always known the way. She thought about every late shift she'd worked, every condescending customer, every time someone had treated her like she was invisible or stupid or less than, every time she'd smiled and said yes sir and right away ma'am and swallowed her pride like bitter medicine. But she also thought about her mother's smile when Claire walked in the door after work. The way she'd saved her dinner even though Claire had told her not to wait up. The notes she'd leave on the fridge with shaky handwriting. Proud of you. Love you. You're my hero. The music built to the first major crescendo. Claire's whole body moved with it, pouring everything she had into the keys. This was why she'd fallen in love with piano in the first place. This feeling. This power. This ability to take the chaos inside and turn it into something beautiful. In the back of her mind, she was dimly aware that the restaurant was completely silent, except for the piano. But she couldn't think about that now. She was in the middle of the piece, and Rachmaninoff didn't allow for distraction. The second movement began, slower and more melancholic. This was the part that had always made her mother cry. The part that felt like a conversation with someone you'd lost, a love letter to grief. Claire played it for her father, for the man who would never hear her play again, who'd never know that she'd come home, who'd never see her graduate or get married or achieve any of the dreams they'd talked about on long car rides to competitions. But he'd also never see her struggle. Never know about the bills she couldn't pay, or the nights she'd cried herself to sleep. Never feel guilty about any of it. Maybe that was a gift too. The melody shifted, building toward something bigger. Claire felt it coming, the way you feel a storm rolling in. The third movement. The hardest part. The part that separated the good pianist from the great ones. She opened her eyes finally, ready for what came next. The third movement hit like thunder. Claire's hands moved faster than thought, racing through passages that would make most pianists nervous, octave runs that required perfect precision, chromatic scales that had to be crystal clear even at speed, chord progressions that could tire your hands if you tensed up even a little. But Claire wasn't tense. For the first time in 3 years, she felt free. The music exploded through the restaurant. This was the part where Rachmaninoff showed off, where he demanded everything from the performer, technical brilliance and raw emotion at the same time. It was like trying to have a conversation while running a marathon. Claire's fingers flew across the keys, barely seeming to touch them. Her hands crossed over each other, stretching for notes at opposite ends of the keyboard. The melody built and built, each phrase more powerful than the last. She was vaguely aware of gasping from somewhere in the restaurant, but she couldn't stop. This was the point of no return. You either made it through or you crashed and burned. There was no in-between with Rachmaninoff. At table 12, Richard had stopped smiling. He'd been prepared for a lot of things. He'd expected her to play chopsticks or some simple tune and pretend it was impressive. Or maybe she'd know a little bit, enough to stumble through something recognizable before giving up. At worst, he'd figured she'd panic and refuse to play at all. He had not expected this. His friend with the slicked back hair had put down his phone. Just put it down and was staring at Claire with his mouth slightly open. The bald guy with glasses had leaned forward, his dessert forgotten. Even Richard's business partner, who famously hated classical music, looked mesmerized. "Is that Rachmaninoff?" the business partner whispered. Richard didn't answer. He was too busy recalculating everything he'd assumed about the waitress currently destroying his ego at the piano. Across the restaurant, people had completely abandoned their meals. The family at table 6 sat frozen, the parents holding hands. Their teenage daughter had tears running down her face. She played piano too, took lessons every Wednesday, and she knew exactly how difficult this piece was. The elderly couple by the window were both crying now. The husband had his arm around his wife's shoulders, and they were swaying slightly to the music. They'd heard this concerto performed at Carnegie Hall on their honeymoon 50 years ago. Even the staff had emerged from the kitchen. Miguel stood near the door with his hand over his mouth. The line cook, a gruff guy named Pete who claimed he only listened to heavy metal, had stopped pretending to work and was openly watching. Tom, the manager, looked like he might be sick. Whether from pride or panic about what this would mean for his employee dynamic, it was hard to say. A woman in a Navy business suit at table 9 pulled out her phone. But she wasn't recording like everyone else. She was texting someone urgently, her fingers flying across the screen almost as fast as Claire's were flying across the keys. The music shifted again, softer now but somehow more intense. This was the part that required perfect control. You had to make the piano whisper without losing the emotional weight of the piece. Too soft and it disappeared. Too loud and you ruined the moment. Claire played it perfectly. Her years at Juilliard had taught her that power wasn't always about volume. Sometimes the quietest moments were the most devastating. Like right now in this restaurant full of strangers, playing her heart out in her waitress uniform with her feet killing her and her eyes swollen from crying. She thought about all the times she'd imagined her big debut after graduation. She'd pictured a concert hall, a fancy dress, important people in the audience, critics taking notes, her parents in the front row. A career launching. This wasn't that. This was a small diner with checkered tablecloths and a sticky floor. The audience was random people who'd come in for meatloaf and gotten a concert instead. She was wearing a polyester uniform that smelled like fryer oil. But somehow it felt more real than any of those imagined performances. More honest. The music built again and Claire went with it. Her whole body moved with the rhythm. Years of training had taught her that you played with more than just your fingers. You played with your shoulders, your back, your breathing. You played with everything you had. And right now, Claire had a lot to say. She thought about every morning she'd woken up exhausted. Every double shift. Every time she'd checked her bank account and felt that sick drop in her stomach. Every time she'd had to choose between her mother's medication and the electric bill. But she also thought about the good parts. Coming home to her mother's smile. The inside jokes they'd developed. The way her mother still tried to cook dinner even when her hands shook too badly to hold the spoon. The notes she'd leave around the house with recipes and reminders and love. The sacrifice had been worth it. That wasn't the question. But that didn't mean it hadn't cost her something. The music was saying all of that. Every note carried weight. Every phrase told a story. This was what her professor had meant about playing from the broken places. Claire wasn't hiding anything anymore. Not her grief, not her anger, not her exhaustion, not her love. It was all there in the music. Richard's face had gone pale. He was a man who prided himself on reading people, on knowing who mattered and who didn't. He'd spent his whole life dividing the world into winners and losers, important and irrelevant, worth his time and beneath his notice. He'd been so sure about which category Claire belonged in. Now he wasn't sure about anything. The woman in the business suit had gotten up from her table. She walked closer to the piano, moving slowly like she was afraid of disturbing something sacred. She stood there watching, and if Richard had been paying attention, he might have noticed the look on her face. The look of someone who'd just discovered something rare and valuable. But Richard was too busy having a crisis. Claire moved into another crescendo, her hands pounding the keys with controlled fury. This was it, the big moment. The part where everything came together. Technical skill and emotional depth, power and grace. Everything Rachmaninoff had built to. The music filled every corner of the restaurant. It was too big for this space, really. This piece belonged in a concert hall with perfect acoustics and a full orchestra backing it up. But somehow, in this little diner with just the piano and a waitress who'd forgotten she was supposed to be broken, it was enough. More than enough. Miguel had tears streaming down his face. He'd worked with Claire for 2 years and never knew. Never had any idea that the quiet woman who picked up extra shifts and always split her tips with the busboy had this inside her. Pete, the line cook, was shaking his head slowly, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Tom looked like he was doing mental math, trying to figure out what this meant. Could he lose her now? Would she leave? Was he about to be down his best waitress because he'd let some rich jerk push her into revealing she was overqualified for everything? The teenage girl at table 6 grabbed her mother's arm. "Mom," she whispered, "I want to play like that. I want to play exactly like that." Her mother nodded, unable to speak. The elderly couple was full-on weeping now. The husband leaned over and whispered something to his wife. She nodded and squeezed his hand tighter. Even Richard's friends had stopped finding this funny. They'd gone quiet, realizing they'd witnessed their companion make a terrible miscalculation. You didn't mock talent like this. You didn't bet against someone who could do what Claire was doing. The music was reaching its peak. Claire's fingers were starting to tire, but she pushed through it. Just a little longer. Just a little more. The final crescendo was coming. The moment where everything exploded, where all the tension and build-up finally released. Her hands were moving so fast they were almost a blur. The notes crashed over each other like waves, building higher and higher. Louder and louder. More and more intense. This was what she'd been born to do. Not serving coffee or taking orders or smiling at people who looked through her like she was invisible. This feeling of being completely alive. Completely present, completely herself. The woman in the business suit had her phone pressed to her ear now, talking urgently to whoever she'd texted. She kept her voice low, but her eyes never left Claire. And then, just when it seemed like the music couldn't possibly get any bigger, Claire brought it down, softened it. The same melody from earlier, but transformed. Quieter now, more mature, like someone who'd been through hell and decided to be kind anyway. This was the home stretch. The final moments. Claire could feel it ending, feel the piece winding down to its conclusion. Her hands were aching, her back hurt. Her feet were screaming in those terrible shoes, but she'd never felt more powerful in her entire life. The last few phrases came out clear and strong. No hesitation, no doubt. Just pure, honest music from a woman who'd forgotten she knew how to fly. And then, with one final, delicate chord, it was over. Claire's hand stayed on the keys for a moment, trembling slightly. The last note hung in the air, slowly fading. The restaurant was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed, and then someone started clapping. The elderly man by the window was the first to stand. His applause started slow, almost reverent, and then grew stronger. His wife joined him, then the family at table 6, then Miguel, then Pete from the kitchen. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet. The applause was deafening. Claire sat frozen at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys. She couldn't quite process what was happening. People were clapping, for her, standing up and clapping like she'd just performed at Carnegie Hall instead of a small diner on a Tuesday night. The teenage girl was crying and clapping at the same time. Her father had his phone out, still recording, but he was wiping his eyes with his other hand. The mother just stood there with both hands over her heart. Miguel was whooping now, actually whooping, and Pete was banging his hand on the kitchen door frame like he was at a rock concert. Even Tom was clapping, though he looked dazed, like someone had hit him over the head with something heavy. Claire slowly stood up from the piano bench. Her legs felt shaky. The applause continued, getting louder. Someone whistled. Several people were filming on their phones, capturing this moment. That was incredible, someone shouted. Beautiful, someone else called out. The woman in the navy business suit was clapping too, but she was also moving through the crowd toward Claire. She had purpose in her step, like someone who knew exactly what she wanted. Claire's eyes found table 12. Richard's friends were clapping, though they looked uncomfortable about it. But Richard himself sat perfectly still. His face was unreadable. The $1,000 still sat on the table in front of him, looking somehow smaller than it had before. The applause finally started to die down. People were still standing, but the noise level dropped enough that voices could be heard again. "Holy crap, Claire," Miguel said, reaching her first. "Why didn't you ever tell us you could do that?" Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. She honestly didn't know what to say. The woman in the business suit arrived next. Up close, she was probably in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and an expensive haircut. She held out a business card. "Andrea Walsh," she said. "I'm the artistic director for the Riverside concert series." Claire took the card automatically, still too overwhelmed to fully understand what was happening. "That was one of the finest performances of Rachmaninoff's second I've heard outside a professional concert hall," Andrea continued. "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was 6, Claire heard herself say. "But I haven't. I mean, I used to study at Juilliard, but I had to leave and I haven't played in 3 years until just now." Andrea's eyebrows went up. "Juilliard? And you're working here? It's complicated," Claire said softly. "I'm sure it is." Andrea glanced at Claire's uniform, then back at her face. "Listen, I'm having dinner with the mayor and 2 board members tomorrow night. We're finalizing our spring concert lineup. I want you there. I want you to play for them. Can you do that?" Claire's head was spinning. I don't have anything prepared. I don't even have a piano to practice on." "Do you still know this piece? The one you just played?" "Yes, but then you're prepared." Andrea pulled out her phone. "I'm going to text you the address. This could be a real opportunity. We pay our performers. Well, and if the board likes you, there could be more concerts, a regular slot in the series." "I have a job," Claire said, though even as she said it, she wasn't sure why. A week ago, keeping this job had been everything. Now it felt like a shoe that didn't quite fit anymore. "Think about it," Andrea said, "but don't think too long. I'll need an answer by tomorrow morning." She pressed her card into Claire's hand and squeezed it once before walking back to her table to pay her bill. The crowd was dispersing now, people returning to their meals, though everyone kept glancing at Claire. The elderly couple stopped on their way out. "My dear," the old woman said, taking both of Claire's hands in hers. "That was a gift. Thank you for sharing it with us." Her husband nodded. "We heard Horowitz play that piece in 1978. You were just as good. Better, even. More heart." They left a $100 bill on the piano before shuffling out. Claire stared at it, not sure whether to laugh or cry. Other people came up as they left. The family from table 6. A businessman who'd been eating alone. A young couple on a date. They all said something kind, and several of them left money on the piano or pressed bills into her hand. By the time the crowd thinned out, Claire had over $300 that had nothing to do with Richard's bet, which brought her back to table 12. Richard still sat there. His friends had gone quiet, looking anywhere but at Claire or each other. The $1,000 remained on the table. Claire walked over slowly. Her earlier confidence had faded, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. She just wanted this part to be over. "So," she said quietly when she reached the table, "I guess I played something impressive." Richard looked up at her. His face was difficult to read. Pride warring with shame, anger fighting with something that might have been respect. That was... He started, then stopped. Tried again. "You were trained at Juilliard?" 2 years before I had to leave. Why did you leave?" It wasn't really his business. But Claire found she didn't care anymore. "My mom got sick. Someone had to take care of her. Someone had to work." Richard looked down at the table. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally, he picked up the stack of bills and held them out to her. "You won the bet," he said. "Claire didn't take the money. You also owe me an apology." That was the deal. The silence at the table was crushing. Richard's friends stared at the tablecloth. Richard himself looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "You're right," he said finally. The words came out rough, like they hurt. "I was out of line. I judged you without knowing anything about you. I treated you like you were less than me because of your job, and that was wrong." He paused. I'm sorry. It wasn't the most eloquent apology Claire had ever heard, but it sounded genuine, and right now that was enough. She took the money. Thank you. Richard nodded once, then stood up. His friends scrambled to follow. They left quietly, and for once Richard didn't look like the most important person in the room. Tom appeared at Claire's elbow as soon as they were gone. Claire, I had no idea you could— Tom, Claire interrupted gently. I need to talk to you about my schedule. His face fell. You're quitting. I don't know yet, Claire said honestly. But I need tomorrow night off, and maybe some other nights going forward. I need to figure some things out. Tom nodded slowly. Whatever you need. And Claire, you were amazing, Claire smiled. A real smile this time. Thanks, Tom. She finished her shift in a daze. When she finally clocked out at midnight, her feet were screaming and she could barely keep her eyes open. But she clutched Andrea Walsh's business card in one hand and nearly $2,000 total in the other. The drive home was a blur. She climbed the stairs to their apartment on autopilot, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow. What would she tell her mother? What would she wear to dinner with the artistic director and the board? Could she really do this? She unlocked the door as quietly as possible. The living room was dark except for the TV playing softly. Her mother was asleep in the recliner, a blanket tucked around her. Claire knelt beside the chair. Mom, she whispered. Mom, wake up. Her mother's eyes fluttered open. Claire, what time is it? Are you okay? I'm okay. Claire felt tears starting again, but good tears this time. Mom, something happened tonight. Something good. She told her mother everything. The bet, the humiliation, the decision to play, the performance, Andrea Walsh, the money, all of it came tumbling out. Her mother listened, her shaking hands gripping Claire's tightly. When Claire finished, there were tears streaming down both their faces. I'm so proud of you, her mother whispered. I always knew you'd play again. I always knew. I couldn't have done it without you, Claire said. Everything I gave up, I'd do it again. But maybe I can have both now. Maybe I can take care of you and still play. Her mother cupped Claire's face with trembling hands. You never stopped being a pianist, Butterfly. Even when you weren't playing. It's who you are. Claire pulled out her phone and found the video that the teenager's father had posted online. It was already up, already spreading. She pressed play and the sound of Rachmaninoff filled their small living room. They sat together in the dark, listening to Claire play. Her mother hummed along softly, moving her head to the music. And for the first time in 3 years, Claire felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. She had no idea if the meeting tomorrow would lead to anything, no idea if she could really build a career from this one night. But she knew one thing for certain. She was done being invisible. She was done making herself small. She was a pianist. And the world was about to remember why that mattered.